and welcome back to my channel, Charlotte and Face. Today I'm going to be talking about something completely different again. Today I'm going to be talking about books. I have quite a few books here that I would like to talk about. So that is what we're going to do. So let's get right into it. The first book I'd like to talk about is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabah Tahir. I don't know how to say the author's name, but it is An Ember in the Ashes. It is a young adult fantasy romance novel and it's 448 pages long, so a decent length. I mean, a very good length. That's quite a lot of pages, and the print is quite small, so a lot of words in there. Anyway, on to the actual story. Our main character is Leia, who in the start of the story lives with her grandparents, but they are murdered by the Empire. So there's a tyrannical empire and she escapes the Empire when they murder her grandparents, and they take her brother, they arrest her brother. She escapes and ends up with the rebels. The rebels say that she has to infiltrate Blackcliff, which is a military school run by the Empire, and there she meets Elias, who is our love interest. It's a really good series because each book is quite different. I also like this book because you get to see Leia's perspective and Elias's perspective. So some chapters are written with Leia as first person and other chapters are written as Elias as first person, so you get to see both characters' point of view. I think it's a really good book. Would highly recommend. You should read it. The next book I have to talk about is The Knife of Never Letting Go. This is a slightly different toned book. It is The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness. It's less young adult, more just fantasy. I think this is a really good book. I read it a while ago. I read it when I was quite young, like 13, but I think people of all ages will love this book if you love this kind of fantasy. It's set in a town where everybody can hear everyone else's thoughts, and the town is all males, and once they get to a certain age they become men. So there's men and boys, and our main character Todd is the last boy in the town, so he's the youngest and he hasn't become a man yet. When Todd is in the woods one day, he discovers a patch of silence, which is odd because the town is so noisy with everyone's thoughts. A patch of silence is impossible. But he discovers this patch of silence, which leads him to leave the town and discover lots of other things about the world that he didn't know. Oh well, it says winner of the Book Trust Teen Fiction Prize, so I guess it is a teen novel. I think it's really good, high action, fast pace, really interesting story, really original story. There's also a dog. Almost dropped the book. There's also a dog in the story. It's like Todd's best friend. He's a really lovely character. I love dogs. There's aliens, but not in the typical way you'd think an alien story would be. It's just very interesting and I love it. Would highly recommend. Love this book. The next book I want to recommend is Certain Dark Things. It looks like this on the cover, and it is by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and it's a really good book. It's about vampires and different vampire clans, and each clan has like different qualities about it. Maybe some of the vampires will suck blood, maybe some of the vampires won't suck blood. If I look in the book, oh yeah, in the glossary at the back, I mean, you can't see because the light's too bright. In the glossary at the back, it tells you about the different clans and like where they're native to. So the Asabasum clan is native to West Africa. They possess very sharp teeth, originally tree dwellers. They are also able to shapeshift. So yeah, set in Mexico City, whereas most stories are either set in another world, or if they're set in this world, they're set in either the UK or USA. So I think it's really cool that we've got a book here set in Mexico. So our main character is Domingo, who is a garbage collecting street kid, who one day runs into the path of Alt, who is a vampire from the Aztec clan of vampires, and she is running away from a gang of vampires. She needs to get out of South America to get away from this gang, and she wants to feed on Domingo, but she ends up forming an attachment to him. All the while there's a policewoman who's following the trail of corpses that Alt and other vampires have left behind. So we've got an unassuming street kid, a vampire and a policewoman all mixed up in this gang war between vampires, and I just think it's a really cool concept. The way it's written is really good. It's roughly about 300 pages and there are 40 chapters, so it's not too long of a book. I have the hard copy, but I'm pretty sure you can get the paper copy as well. I just think it's a very unusual book in a very good way. It's unlike anything I've read elsewhere, and yeah, would highly recommend Certain Dark Things. Like, it's a very different take on vampires, like a very original take. And then we get on to my favourites. I'm sure you've heard of Sarah J Maas, who is the author of Throne of Glass and A Court of Thorns and Roses. I love these books. These are my favourite books. Sarah J Maas is my favourite author. Let's start with Throne of Glass. Throne of Glass is set in Erelia, where Selena Sordothian has spent a year in Endovia, a labour camp where she is a prisoner. She is Ardalan's assassin, so she is the best assassin in the kingdom of Ardalan, but she was caught and sent to Endovia, the labour camp, where Prince Dorian, the Prince of Ardalan, goes to meet her and take her out of the labour camp to offer her a position as his candidate in the games that the king's putting on. So the king is putting on a competition to find his champion, and members of the court can pick their champions to compete to become the king's champion, and Selena is one of the people chosen by the prince, and it's just about her trial. The first book, Throne of Glass, is about her competing in this competition and the trials that she faces within the competition and outside of the competition. It's just very, very good. Would highly recommend. Highly recommend this book. I love it so much. It is, I can't actually choose between a favourite. Like, the Throne of Glass is more narrative driven. A Court of Thorns and Roses, I would say, is more character driven. So as a segue, let's move on to A Court of Thorns and Roses. A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas is so good. Some people say it's a modern take on Beauty and the Beast, but I don't really see that in it. I just see it as like an original story, because it's very different to Beauty and the Beast, and I wouldn't like to compare it to that story because it's so much better. Our main character is Feyre, who lives in a very small, impoverished town on the border between the mortal world and the fairy world. One day she's in the woods and her family are pretty much starving, so she's very desperate to make a kill to feed them and get some money. So she sees a wolf and she kills the wolf with an arrow through the eye. She takes the wolf back to her family, they eat the meat, she goes to the market and sells the hide of the wolf. But then, a few nights later, a beast crashes through their front door of their little house that they live in and demands payment for the life that she took. So it's basically a life for a life. So she can either die or she can go with the beast to the immortal realm, the fairy realm, and live out her days with him. So she decides to go and live with this beast man thing, and he, once over the border of the immortal realm, transforms into his fairy body rather than his beast body, and he turns out to be quite attractive, and they live together and things happen. And I'm not selling this very well, but I love this story so much. I love the whole series. I've read the whole series, including the novella that came out, and I will read the newest novella that's coming out in February, I believe. Gonna pre-order it this week. I highly recommend. I also recommend the other books by Sarah J Maas, which is Catwoman Soul Stealer. It's a story about Catwoman, and yeah, it's set in Gotham, obviously. So in this story, Batman is away from Gotham, so Catwoman is kind of free to do whatever she wants. She meets up with Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn to wreak havoc on Gotham City. There's also a male character in this, who she has dealings with. So I can't really say too much about the story because it's a Catwoman story, and it's part of the DC Icon series, which also has a story about Batman, Superman and Wonder Woman, and Catwoman is part of that series. So I really love Sarah J Maas's writing, and in every series her writing is different but still equally as good. So I love this book as well, highly recommend. And I haven't actually read this, but I also recommend, just because it's Sarah J Maas, this is a big book, Crescent City by Sarah J Maas. I believe it's like a mystery action kind of thing. The main character is Bryce, whose friends get murdered by a demon, and the culprit is supposedly put behind bars, but 2 years later the murders start up again, so she goes out to hunt down the murderer. I've heard that at the start there are a lot of characters being introduced, which can get a bit confusing, but once you wrap your head around the characters and how many there are, I think it's got mainly good reviews. It's called Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood, which the name alone and the cover, look at the cover. I think this is one of the best covers of all the Sarah J Maas books. Can't say the same for the story because I haven't read it, but still would recommend Crescent City. And those are all the books that I had to recommend. Hope you enjoyed another new kind of video. Good stuff. Before I leave you, I must mention that I am also a writer of like teen fantasy novels, so you can follow me on Wattpad. I will link it down below. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time. Bye.
내가 만약 널 3시에 보기로 했다쳐 난 그럼 최소 10시부터 설렐 거야 연애 다소 계산적이거나 밀당